Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. If there's one type of game I will never get bored of playing or reviewing, it is the old school side-scrolling beat-em-ups. We've already looked at Double Dragon, and a more recent example in Cobra Kai. The story continues on the PlayStation 4. But today we see these games in their prime, looking at the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis from 1991. This is a retro review of Streets of Rage. Released in 1991, Streets of Rage took place in a modern to futuristic city in America that had once been peaceful but was now under the grip of a criminal organisation run by the villainous Mr. X. In a desperate attempt to rival this criminal organisation, 3 police officers have taken to vigilantism, and that is where our game takes over. Choosing between a 1-player or simultaneous 2-player game, you get to choose between 3 characters, Adam, Axel and Blaze, each with minor differences to their abilities and different physical attacks. While visibly their attacks do differ, there isn't a great deal of difference to how they actually play out as characters, so it just really comes down to which one you want to play as. The gameplay of Streets of Rage was clearly inspired by Double Dragon and to a lesser degree Golden Axe. Once in game, the controls are pretty basic but do the job quite well. You have at your disposal a number of basic strikes, kicks, punches, as well as some slightly more complex ones. You can grapple your opponent and then do different attacks or even suplexes. Parts of the environment are interactive, such as telephone boxes and barrels that can be broken, and weapons can be picked up and used, all slightly differently. Once per life or level, you can also call on a special move, which brings in a police car to launch a rocket. This delivers an explosion which takes health off all of the enemies on the screen, apart from you, who are apparently immune to explosive rockets. And control-wise, that's generally the gist of the game. There isn't a great deal more to it. The animation for each character is mildly different depending on which one, so certain ones may do uppercuts when other ones do hook kicks, some may do suplexes when others do more basic throws, but on the whole, they generally have the same impact, so it's more about what you visually prefer. From that point on, it's simply a matter of working through 8 levels, each with their own end-of-level boss who is ridiculously oversized, such as Boomerang Dude here, and each has their own little novelty gimmick, but that's about it. There's not a great deal beyond that, and there doesn't really need to be. The addition of a 2-player co-op mode is fantastic fun and really adds to the enjoyment in the game. Being able to play alongside a friend, it just gives a whole other level to it. So the gameplay is pretty simple. The graphics themselves are pretty impressive for the time. They were bright, colourful, but also had a dark atmosphere. Certain characters were repetitive, as with Double Dragon and others. You tended to see versions of the same character coming on the screen multiple times, or the same character just slightly coloured differently. The only characters that were completely different, other than ourselves, were the end-of-level bosses. The audio was good, and the music was actually so successful that they ended up being released on CDs eventually, which goes to show how popular they were, given the time this was released. So then, how was the game actually received at the time? Well, really well. This was a game that scored around 90% in most reviews, and was generally considered one of the best games ever released on the Sega Mega Drive. It went on to spawn 2 sequels in the following years, and eventually a resurgence of the game, but we'll stick with those 2 sequels. But whilst both of them did okay, neither of them really lived up to the excitement of the first game, which was generally considered the peak of the franchise. It probably didn't help that fighting games at around this time were about to be swallowed up by the buzz around one-on-one fighting games such as Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat. While side-scrolling combat games hadn't exactly become a thing of the past just yet, they certainly weren't the main focus. Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat would become the leaders of combat games, and games like Streets of Rage often felt like just one of the pack, but I think it's fair to say that Streets of Rage was very much the leader of that pack. So how does it fare under modern scrutiny? Well, I used to play Streets of Rage quite a lot when it was first released. One of my friends had a Sega Mega Drive and we'd played this game on 2-player for hours on end. I recently got a copy of it on a Best of Sega Mega Drive games disc for the Nintendo Switch, and this was one of the first games I wanted to play, and I have to be honest, it really stood up. It was still just as enjoyable now as it was then, apart from the fact that because my Switch is a Lite, I had no scope to play a 2-player. I also seem to remember each player having their own different version of the police attack, but apparently that was never the case, so that must have just been my own distorted memories. As with my review of Double Dragon, the gameplay does get a little bit repetitive, however, that doesn't seem to affect it as much here. There's something about the gameplay that just feels a little bit smoother and more natural, so it's much more fun to play. Whilst I don't feel this is a game I could play for hours like I used to, it doesn't really need to. A lot of retro games now have a different type of quality, and this feels like something I could easily pick up and play quite quickly and come back to multiple times. It's challenging without being overbearing, the differing characters help it feel fresh, as do the different level designs, so I'd feel more than happy to come back to this game over and over again. So, Streets of Rage on the Sega Mega Drive. I think this game, it's fair to give it a 7 out of 10. It's still a great deal of fun to play now, even if this type of game has aged. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to give us a subscribe, and you can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram.